Alright, in this video we're going to allow people to register to the site. So this is an important thing for us because, again, one of the reasons why we're doing this first is so that we can have people sign up to be able to test the MMO. And obviously if you are going to be writing an MMO, you will definitely want some sort of user registration system so that you can keep track of your characters and everything like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to implement a very basic registration system. It's going to be pretty standard. They're going to click a registration link, type in some information, hit submit. Then they're going to receive an email with the link that will allow them to verify their account. Once their account gets verified, they'll be added automatically to the registered role, which will then allow them access to the homepage. So until they've validated their account, they won't have access to the homepage. So the first step of doing this is to create the appropriate controller, views, and view model for our registration thing, and then link it up with a button on the login form, because remember, they will be redirected to the login form if they try to access the site directly. You might not want this particular URL scheme. You might want to have a basic splash page that they'll see that isn't a login page. But again, I'm not a designer and this isn't a design series, so we're just going to keep things simple and redirect them to the login page if they're not logged in. We'll add a register button somewhere on this page. And like I said, we'll also put together all of our appropriate controllers and views. So I'm going to go into buzzmmo.web. I'm going to scope to this for now. We're going to be backing out in a moment here to go back into the data project. But for now, I'm going to scope into buzzmmo.web. I'm going to open up controllers and I'm going to add a new class. I'm going to call this the register controller. Now, we're not going to be doing anything fancy with OAuth or ASP.NET's authentication handlers. Those are really cool. They're not terribly difficult to set up, but honestly, I don't want to deal with creating Facebook and Twitter and GitHub authentication with this. I would rather it just be a straight-up register form, run-of-the-mill register form that we can tweak however we want to. So a register controller is going to have to inherit from the controller base class. We're going to create a public action result. How about register? The URL of that's going to look pretty awful. Register/register. I don't care. If you guys are so inclined, you can of course go into your routes config and manipulate those however you see fit. Typically I would, generally speaking, when I work on front-end applications, I write a custom route for every single action. But in the interest of time, we'll be using the default action and simply have this URL be effectively register/register, which doesn't look all that great, but whatever. Register is going to return a view with a new register view model. We haven't created that class yet, but we will here shortly. Then I'm going to write HTTP post for our post action, and I'll say public AR register form, and I'll say return view form, so that we'll just simply post back to our form. This minimum amount of code will allow us to test our view model and our form before we actually write any registration logic. Now let's go ahead and create the register class. Register class, wow. Yeah, you might want to think of a different name for this, but whatever. So now we have a register class. We're going to give it some properties that will dictate what is going to show up on the form. So to register, we need them to choose a username, an email, a password, and I also want to have them confirm their password. So let's start with username, public string username. Username is going to be required. Of course, this will bring in system component model data annotations. Username will also have a max length of 128, so that we don't accidentally post to our database with a length longer than 128, because that's the length of our column. And if we got that far, basically MySQL will just throw an exception and give our users a nasty error. Next up, let's do our email. So I'm going to say public string email. I'm going to say required, and I'm going to say, do we have a max length on email? I honestly can't remember. Email, blah, 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 blah. yeah, we have a max length of 128. And then we're going to give it a data type of data type.email. Now, I am not going to worry about validating emails. Validating emails is really a fool's errand. We could paste in a regular expression that will mostly work, but generally speaking, it's more trouble than it's worth. Typically, you might want to say something like, make sure it has an @ symbol in there. But I want to point out just really quickly for all the people, all the developers out there who try to validate emails, unless you can recite to me the RFC that defines what an email address is backwards, I don't want people writing email validation logic that will disallow a significant portion of emails, because there are some really weird ways that you can write emails. The fact that we are going to be sending an email to require the user to receive an email, then click on a link, that's validation of the email enough to me. Because in reality, that's the only surefire way of validating an email address in the first place. Again, if you want to throw in a simple regular expression that'll just validate the existence of an @ symbol or something, I mean, go right ahead. Just don't go for those like million line long regular expressions that try to validate email addresses, because that's just a waste of time. Next up, we need our password. Our password will be required. We will not have a max length because it's hashed, and the hash is a fixed width, but we will have a data type of data type.password. And then we're going to have a public string password confirm. It will be required. It will have a data type of data type.password. And we'll also throw in a data annotation that will require the password confirmed to match the password. That's really easy to do. We just use the compare attribute, and the other property is going to be called password. I'll also want to override the display name of password confirm, because password confirm is a very friendly name for us programmers, but it's not going to look very good when it's displayed on the form. So I'll simply write in display name. Display name, unfortunately, isn't in the data annotations namespace. I'm not entirely sure why. It's probably some weird historical reason. But regardless, when we use display name, we're going to have to make sure that we also include the system component model namespace. Inside of display name, I'm going to say confirm password with a space, so it looks a little nicer. Okay, so that's our register view model. Now that we have that, and it's not being passed quite yet into our view, because in our controller we haven't included the proper namespace. So we do that by adding a using statement for MMO web view models. And then finally, we're going to create our view. So in views, I'm going to create a new folder called register. Inside of register, I'm going to add a Razor MVC view called register. Inside of this, I'm going to give it a model of register, which will autocomplete to MMO web view models register. Then I'm going to delete everything else inside of it. Then I'm going to open up, you guys don't have to do this, but I need to refresh my memory again. Let's open up our create form of our user. And okay, so we just do form group and form control. That's easy enough. So to write the form, we're going to do a using html.begin form, which will open us up a form. I'll do html.validation summary. Then I'll say div class form group, and then we'll do html.label for, f goes into f, let's start with the username. Then I'll say html.textbox for username, with a HTML attribute of class equals form control. Then we're going to do a class form group, and for some reason Visual Studio is really lagging out on me. I don't know if you guys see it, but it's pretty bad. Let's do our email next. Come on. There you go. With the class of form control. Next up, let's do a form group for our password. So HTML label for, seriously, write this same sort of thing over the course of many years, and you will be able to write HTML or MVC forms in your sleep. as long as Visual Studio stops lagging. It's getting really annoying. And then we'll also do a label for our password confirm with an HTML password for password confirm with the class of form control. Then we'll open up a p tag and we will write input type equals submit, value equals register, class equals button, button primary, and button small. Then we'll say or HTML action link cancel, and we'll post back to our login action on auth. And that will be our form. So hitting F6, we'll recompile it. And then let's go ahead, come back here, and we'll immediately notice that I forgot to actually add the link to register from our login page. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that both at the top here and as a button here. So let's do it on the layout first. I'll go to Share to Layout on the front end. I'll find where I show my login button, and I'll add a new button. Also, I can remove the pull right class from it from earlier testing, because that will be ignored. We'll do an action link register, going to the register action on the register controller. Then we'll go into our auth login systeml, and we'll say or I don't know. Let's just leave it as a link. Let's not worry about making it a button. I'll do action link register, going to the action register on the controller register. Alright, so now that we have the thing set up, we now have a register link at the top as well as a register link down here. And if we go to register, we will see our registration form. And if we hit register, we'll see username is required, email is required, password is required, confirm password is required. So let's go ahead and fill in some of this stuff. We'll see that persists. Let's fill in password, but then fill in confirm password as something different. Now it says confirm password and password do not match. Let's fill them with the same thing. And it did indeed properly post, although it didn't actually do anything because we haven't worked on any of the logic that's going to handle that behind the scenes for us. Okay, so what happens when we register? Also, the cancel button should work. Yep. All right, sweet. Okay, so what happens when we register a user or when we successfully post with our register form? Well, what we want to do is we want to create a new user row. We want to generate a validation token and put it on that user role. Then we want to send the user an email with this supplied email address with a link back to an action on our site that will allow him to verify his account using that information or using that token. So the first thing we need to do is we need to add the registration token to our database. There's a couple ways we can do that. We could add a one-to-many relationship between users and a new table, or we could simply add a field onto our database that on our user's entity. I'm probably going to go with the latter approach. So coming back in here to our server, or sorry, our data, entities user, I want to add a string on here that will represent a base 64 encoded token. And let's think. And we're going to want to store it as a varchar 64. I chose a varchar 64 just because I like doing varchar as multiples of 2 for some reason, and also because we are going to be base 64 encoding a randomly generated string of data, a string of bytes. And I'm thinking about 32 bytes of randomness should be good enough for our verification token. And the number of bytes we would need to store that is somewhere around 44, 46 or something. And the next power of 2 is 64. So let's just use 64 bytes. So I'm going to say public string verify email token. I'm going to set it a max length of 64. Now I don't want to worry about making it required because it will be set to null when it's not being used. So now that we have our verify email token created, we can jump into our package manager console and add our migration. So I'll do add migration, add verify email token. I'll also want to make sure that my default project is buzzmmo.data. All right, and I also want to go ahead and index this column. It's a small fixed width index. It's not going to be used on all of our rows. Don't really need to index it, but you know what? It makes sense because we are going to be querying on the database to that, and I think the additional storage and RAM requirements are worth just a little bit faster registrations, even though we're talking about the difference of nanoseconds. But still. So I'm going to say add, or what? Index, create index on table dbo.users on verify email token. Unique. Yeah, we're going to set unique to true. And the reason we're going to set it to true is just as a sanity check. Now, cryptographically randomly generated numbers should very, very rarely, or at least 32 bytes of cryptographically randomly generated numbers should rarely ever collide, especially since we're going to be setting the verify email token to null when we don't need it. But the unique constraint will provide us just a tiny bit of sanity check for the absolutely ridiculously, insanely improbable event that we generate 2 tokens for a particular user. So now that we've added that, let's go ahead and load up our package manager console again and type in update database. And we now have a verify email token added to our database. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into our register action, best named action ever, and stub it out or write it. So I'm going to scope back into our web project, and I'm going to go to register controller, the register action. First of all, I'm going to say if not model state is valid, return view form. Then I'm going to say var using var database equals new MMO database context. Which, by the way, instead of doing it like this, I could have simply done up here at the top, I could say private, read-only, MMO database context, database equals new MMO database context. Again, we're not being very, we're not architecting this very well considering our lack of IOC and everything, but if people are curious about how I would go about doing that, that's definitely something we can look at exploring in a later video. But for now, we're going to keep things as simple as possible. What I'm going to do is I want to add a user. So I want to first of all, create a new user. Var user equals new user. I want to import the buzzmmo data entities namespace. I'll use object initialization syntax to set up his properties. I'll set his username to form.username. I'll set his email to form.email. And then I'm going to set user.setPassword form.password. We already know that password and password confirm contain the same value because of the data annotations we put on them. The next up, I want to generate a random number. I want to generate 32 bytes of random data and then base 64 encode them and set them for our verify token. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say using var random equals new, I'm not going to use the new random class because the random class is very fast, but it's not considered to be cryptographically secure. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to instantiate a random number generator, and that comes out of systems security cryptography. And unfortunately, we can't instantiate that because it's an abstract class. I always forget the it's like RNG crypto service provider. Yeah, that's the one we want. I always forget the name of that class. The name of the class that we want is RNG crypto service provider, which comes from system security cryptography. Then I'm going to say random dot, so we're going to want to get bytes, so we're going to we're going to want to instantiate a byte buffer. So say var buffer equals new byte, new byte array. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Byte, there you go, 32. So we want 32 bytes. And I'm going to say random, I'm going to say get non-zero bytes. I don't like zeros and random numbers for some reason. Anyway, what this method will do is it'll fill our buffer with 32 bytes of random data. Then we're going to say user dot verify email token equals convert. Convert will bring in a using statement for the system namespace. And then I want 2 base 64 string. I'll pass in buffer. I wonder what those formatting options are. Insert line breaks and none. I don't care. Okay, so what we've done is we've generated 32 bytes of random data and we've converted it to a base 64 string. The next thing we want to do is send an email with the verify email token. We'll go ahead and do that in the next video, but for now I just want to finish out our register method as well as our other action that will be used to confirm our registration. Instead of returning view form, I want to return redirect to action, and I'll redirect to action, I don't know, register success, or how about just success, because we're already in the register controller. And then I'll create a public AR success. And then I'll return, wow, I forgot to actually add the user to the database. So our register method doesn't actually add the user to the database, nor does it automatically log the user in. I want to do both of those things. I want to add him to the database and I want to log him in. So to do that, I'll do database.users.add user, and then I'll say auth.user equals user. So that'll log him in and it'll add him to the database. Okay, so then we want to implement our success method. Our success method will simply just return a view with a new register success view model. We'll create this view model in a moment. But the only thing I want to pass into the register success view model is username equals auth user username. I also want to add an authorize attribute to the success method to make sure that they're logged in before they can see that, because as you see here, I'm assuming that auth.user is non-null, which auth.user will be null if they're not actually logged in. Okay, so now we have to create our register success view model and then our register success view. So I'll go into view models and I'll add a new class called register success. The register success view model will simply have a public string username property. And you'll see that that'll line up correctly with what we implemented in our action. So now we have a register success view model. Let's go ahead and create the appropriate view. Let's go to view registers. Let's add a new Razor MVC view with layout, and we'll say success. Register success as the model, and we'll clear everything else out. And we'll put in H1 saying welcome, comma, model, uppercase model, username. Please, or what do we want to let's just say, please check your, that's not how you spell please. Please check your email for the verification. Please verify. I don't even know why I'm wasting time typing this out. Please verify your email by clicking on the verification link that we have sent to you. There we go, that's good enough. Remember, even though we've logged them in and they are indeed a registered user, they don't have the registered role yet, so they won't be able to see the home page. For example, they won't be able to see the launcher download link or whatever else you want to add in there, nor should they be able to be allowed to log into the game yet. Okay, so let's go ahead and do one more thing. On our register controller, I want to create a new action that will verify a user. So I'm going to say public AR for action result verify, and then I'm going to say string verify email, or how about just string token. Then I'm going to say var user equals database users single or default. Oh, come on. I hate when it does that. There we go. That'll bring in a using statement for system.link. And then I'll say t goes into t verify email token equals token. Case and sensitivity shouldn't matter with base 64. Actually, no, I think it might. In that case, I'll just do a simple sanity check. I'll say if user is null or not user verify email, or actually I can just say if user is null or user verify email token is null or not user verify email token dot equals token in, how about or null ignore case, then we will return content invalid token, or we'll return a view. Register verify false. Otherwise, so register verify is a class that doesn't exist yet. Well, that'll be the view model for this action. If they did pass in the right token, we want to add them to the registered role. So I'm going to say user.roles.add database.roles.single or actually I just want single. This will throw an exception if this role is not found, which is exactly what we want. We'll do single name equals registered. And then after we do that, we'll do database.save changes, and we'll return a view register verify, a new register verify, passing in did verify to being true, so we can show them the proper message. Again, I made another mistake on my register method. It's probably because it's so horribly named, it's just destroying my brain and making me not able to concentrate on the logic. But I did forget to say database.save changes. Simply doing database.users.add isn't going to actually add the user, despite the fact the code kind of says it does. That actually just queues that action, and we have to flush it by saying database save changes. Okay, we have two more steps before we can fully test our registration. And that is going to be to create the register verify view model with the did verify property, and then create the register verify view. So let's go into our view models and add a register verify class. It'll have a public bool did verify property. I'll back off into our register controller to make sure that the code will now compile, which it will. Then I'll jump into views, register. I'll create a new systemal and I'll call it verify with the model of register verify, which of course will be auto-completed to Buzz MMO web view models. And then I'll delete everything else because we don't need anything else. And then I'll say if model did verify. We could have split this into two views, couldn't we have? Either way, this works. Your account is now verified, or activated, I guess. HTML action link, oh, come on. HTML action link, let's do, click here, index, home, to go, or to download the launcher, I guess. Assuming that we have allowed people with this particular group to download the launcher. We'll want to add access controls for that in the future, but it isn't imperative right now. Then we'll say otherwise, h1, otherwise the verification token was incorrect. Was incorrect. If you copied and pasted the link on your email, please verify it is correct. Something like that. Alright, let's hit F6 to recompile. Wow. There is one last thing I want to do, though, on our register controller. When we verify, I want to clear out the verify email token so that it is null. So to do that, before I hit save changes, I want to say user.verify email token equals null. Okay, now we'll hit F6 for real. We'll come back to our register page and we'll refresh. Let's do a username nlac, which will cause an error. Or should, I can't remember. Yep. Another thing I forgot, I didn't actually put in the unique constraint for the username. Fortunately though, because we have a unique constraint on our SQL database itself, it won't allow that data to happen. So that is a good thing. But to make the user experience a little bit nicer, before we say if not model state is valid, I want to say if database.users.any username equals form.username model state.add model error username duplicate username or something like that. Alright, let's try that again. In this case, we should get a nice error. Duplicate username, sweet. So let's do nlac2 and actually create this user. And we get an object not set to an instance, or the object reference not set to an instance of an object. If we were doing TDD, this would be actually probably easier. But we're not. So let's go ahead to line 77 and see what possibly could have not been set to an instance of an object. Auth.user is not set to an instance of an object. Auth.user.username. For some reason, user isn't set. I wonder. I'm going to go ahead and set a breakpoint there and hit F5. And wait a year and a half for all those assemblies to load. Okay, let's check this out. User is indeed null. Why is user null? Let's go into our auth service and actually see what we broke, or what I broke anyway. Forms identity is valid. Ooh. Yes, I see what's wrong. Okay. Slight leaky abstraction we have here. The problem is that we are setting the... Yep, we're setting the user, we're logging the user in before we save the changes. Like I said, there's a bit of a leaky abstraction in our auth user property, and that is that the auth user property depends on the ID of the user being set. Unfortunately, the ID of the user is not going to be set until we save the changes to the database, because again, Entity Framework will batch those changes and only commit them when we save the changes, and since these ID fields are being generated by the database, it's not going to be present. Effectively, we have logged in as user 0, which, since there is no user 0, it'll cause an error. The fix to this is to add the database save changes above the auth user equals user, but below the database users add user. So I'm going to hit F6. I'm going to go back here. And let's try this again. I'm going to say register, username of nlac3, email of test, doesn't matter, test, register. And emails need to be unique. Wow. Yeah, see what happens when I just try to get stuff done? Everything just breaks. Alright, let's go ahead and fix the email. So in our register post method, we want to make sure that before we check if model state is valid, we'll do if database users any email equals form email model state add. And see, this is why you should always add unique constraints to your database whenever you're working with code, because if you don't and you forget that you wanted your username or your email to be unique, you'll be reminded by an error being thrown, as opposed to getting a database that you didn't expect. So I'll do email, we'll say duplicate email, then we'll hit F6, come back here and hit refresh and repost in. Duplicate email, good. So we'll do test2. There, welcome, nlac3. Please verify your email by clicking the verification link that we have sent you. Obviously, we haven't sent any emails yet, but we can cheat by opening up MySQL Workbench. Going into our database, selecting out of users, and we see that we do indeed have a nice little verification email token added for nlac3. So let's go ahead and verify that. I'm going to come back here on register verify. I'll say token or question mark token equals blah. I'll hit enter, and we'll get sequence contains no elements. Is that because I managed to misspell registered? R-E-G-I-S-T-E-R-E-D, did I think I'm missing an E in there. Whoops. You know, this is really why we should like unit test everything, but we're just kind of cowboy coding it up here. There is one more thing I want to do on verify. It's possible that their session that logged them out or logged them in when they registered has expired by the time that they clicked on their verification email. They may be logged in as a different user, or they may not be logged in as all, or logged in at all. So what I want to do is, after I save the changes, I also want to add auth.user equals user, just so that they are indeed logged into the appropriate user. Coming back here and hitting refresh, we should have verified our token. Of course, we have to wait a year and a half. Your account's not activated. Click here to download the launcher, and indeed our home page lets us in. If I come back here and refresh, it says verification token was incorrect. The reason it says that is because our verification token has been set to null. In addition, we have been added to the proper role. There is one more thing I want to do. Instead of using a query string token equals, I'm well, nah, I'll leave it like that. All right, so I think that pretty much wraps up the backbone to our registration. Really, the only thing left is sending an email out to the user. Let's actually go ahead and wrap that up in this video, because we're going to be using a pretty straightforward NuGet package that will allow us to very easily send emails to our users. And there's a variety of reasons why we might want to do that. For example, allowing the user to reset their password, as well as sending out newsletters or other bits of information. So it's good to go ahead and get the infrastructure set up for sending emails early in the game. So we're going to be using the MVC mailer package. So just search GitHub for MVC mailer if you want to read more documentation on it. But getting it set up is actually really straightforward. All you have to do is go to References, Manage NuGet Packages, Online, MVC Mailer in the search field, and then hit Install. You know, I used to be a .NET developer before NuGet was a thing, and those were dark, dark times. Managing our own dependencies and our lib folders, it was awful. Anyway, so we've now added MVC Mailer to our project. What that's done is pretty much nothing for now, but it has added some code to our web.config, which should be a surprise to nobody because, well, again, we're .NET developers, and what .NET developer doesn't love a massive 126-line XML file? Actually, 126 lines isn't that big at all. I've seen web.configs much, much bigger. Anyway, we see that it added code down here for system.net mail settings. So what we can do is we can configure our SMTP server. I am going to show you guys an SMTP server you guys can use right away. Pro tip, you can also use your Gmail accounts. If you have a Gmail account, you could use that. Gmail plays nicely with code like this. If you have any other account that allows direct SMTP access, you can use that as well. But for now, we are going to be dumping all emails to a local directory. And then at the last bit of this video, I'm going to show you guys a way that you can actually test sending this email out for free to a real email address without having to use a Gmail account or anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment this out, and then I'm going to uncomment this in. So we'll say SMT from some email at gmail.com. I'll say from Nelson at 3dbuzz.com. Delivery method, specified pickup directory. Network host will be localhost. The specified pickup directory, I already have a directory in mind for this on my system. It does have to be a directory that exists. But my directory is going to be f:/Nelson email dump /buzz MMO. So any emails that we send will be basically stored as a file on our file system in this particular folder, or whatever folder that you chose. Okay, so now that we've done that, we need to do or use MVC Mailer. So what does MVC Mailer do? Basically, it allows us to create emails using the Razor markup or the Razor language. So just like we've been creating all our views with Razor, we'll be able to create our emails with Razor, and we'll be able to submit those emails with one line of code. And I think that's really cool. MVC Mailer comes with a built-in scaffolding. Scaffolding is just a fancy word for code generation, and allows us to generate our mailers for us, or at least stub our mailers out so that we don't have to create files and interface classes and all that fun stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my package manager console, and I'm going to type out scaffold mailer.razor, and then I'm going to type in the name of my mailer. So a mailer, think of a mailer like a class, and then think of the methods on that class as being specific emails that you can send. So a mailer is kind of like a controller, and the specific emails you can send are kind of like actions. So the first parameter we pass into the scaffolding is what the mailer we want to be called is. The mailer I want to create, let's just call it the user's mailer. The next thing we do is we specify a list of actions or specific emails we want to be able to send. We're going to be sending a verify email as well as a reset password. The final thing I'm going to pass in is -no interface. The scaffolding by default will create an interface class for our mailer, and that really aids in testing. But since we aren't really practicing testing in this particular project, we do not need that interface. It'll just add more code for us to deal with. Of course, in later videos, if I decide to come back to this and clean it up, we'll probably be abstracting them into interfaces. But for now, keeping things simple, be sure to pass in the no interface flag. By hitting enter, you'll see a bunch of errors. The errors are due to could not find template. Give me a sec. And I'm back. Today, I get an F for being able to read documentation. Let's click up and fix this command. This is actually not multiple parameters. This is actually one parameter, which means we're going to have to separate our different actions with a comma. Otherwise, it'll do some weird stuff. So now I'll hit enter for reals this time, and we see that we have indeed scaffolded out our users mailer class, our users mailer layout, our verify email system, and our reset password system. So let's go ahead and look at those. I'm going to close out all my files so we have some space to work with. And if we open up what? Oh, you gotta be kidding me. Okay, so I just discovered a very easy way to mess this up. Notice my default project was set to buzzmmo.data. It was set to buzzmmo.data because we were doing the migrations earlier. So now if you go over to your buzzmmo.data project, you will see you now have views and mailers, which obviously you don't want. So we're going to delete views and mailers from our data project. Delete them permanently. Then we're going to change our default project and our package manager console to buzzmmo.web. We're going to hit up to execute the same command, and then we're going to hit enter. Okay, now we have scaffolded out our things, so let's go ahead and scope back to our web project. And we now have our user mailer, or user's mailer, which again is just a class with two methods and a constructor. We have our user's mailer layout, which is the layout file used for all of our user mailers emails. We have our reset password, and we have our verify email. So let's go ahead and let's see. Let's go ahead and do, well, we're only going to be doing our verify email in this video. So verify email is basically going to send an email that contains your reset token. Or more specifically, it's going to contain a a specific URL that you can click on to verify your email. Which means that the data we need from verify email is going to be a user entity. And we're going to call it user. So that's going to import buzzmmo.data.entities. And as you see, we have added the user parameter, which will allow us to pass in data into our view, as well as set our to address. So to pass data into our view, we're going to be using our view bag, and I'm going to say view bag dot user. How about username equals user dot username, view bag dot token equals user dot verify email token. Those are the only parameters we're going to need in our view to write our email. Next up, we need to modify where this email is going to be sent to. And that's pretty straightforward. We're just going to do user.email. Now we're not going to want to worry about our reset password, but we do want to go ahead and set the subject to something nicer. So let's say, please verify your email address to activate your BuzzMMO account. Alright, so now we have that all done. we can go into our verify email CSHTML file and write it however we want, just using straight up HTML, and that will be properly sent to the email service. So let's go into verify email. Now remember, we have username and token in our view bag. So I'm going to say h1 welcome viewbag.username. Please a href hash, I'll talk about this in a second. Click here, verify your account. Or copy, and sometimes people don't like clicking on links in their email. So I'll say copy and paste following link. Okay, so now we have a question. How do we generate links to our web application using the mailer? Well, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we pass in an absolute link. Typically, ASP.NET MVC will generate relative links, which only makes sense when you're clicking on a link from a site that's already on the page that you, or the application that you want to be on. When we send an email, we have to make sure to send absolute links. That way they can click on the link without being in our website because, well, they're not, they're in their email client, and then still come up or be redirected to the proper page. There's a couple ways to do this, but MVC Mailer actually comes with a helper method of doing this for us, and that's the URL ABS method. So I'm going to say ahref URL.abs, which is going to require that we add a using MVC Mailer at the top. And then I'm going to pass in a URL. The URL is going to be url.action. The action is going to be verify. The controller is going to be register. And the route values, we want token equals viewbag.token. So that's our URL. I do want to go ahead and factor this out into, or alias this out into a variable, however, because we're going to reuse this down here on this line of code. So I'm going to hit Control X. Up here at the top, I'm going to open up a block of straight up C#, and I'll say var token URL equals bleh. Make sure that I'm not messing anything up. Oh, I am. Take off that. Okay, so now we have our token URL in a variable, so I can replace that in our ahref attribute, and I can also paste that down here. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is we need to send the email, and sending the email is actually incredibly simple. If we go back to our controller, our register controller, and find that comment I left, all we got to do is say var mailer equals new users mailer, which that should add a using statement for mailer's namespace. And then I'll simply say mailer dot verify email user dot send, and that's it. We could make this a little bit simpler by even inlining that variable. So new users mailer dot verify email user dot send. So that's probably the simplest that you could possibly have this code be for sending an email. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to compile by hitting F6. I'm going to open up that directory. Where was that anyway? That was F. Nelson's email dump buzz MMO. We'll open up that directory so we can see our emails being sent. So I'll hit F6. I'll find wherever that page ran off to. Here it is. Hit refresh. Then I'm going to log out, and then I'm going to register. I'm going to do a username of nlac4, email of nelson@3dbuzz.com, password of test. Actually, I think this is already taken, so I'll do nelson5@3dbuzz.com. And then I'll hit register. It says, welcome, nlac4. Please verify your email by clicking on the verification link that we've sent to you, which has been dumped right here. The best way to open up this file, we can get a gist of what's in the file by just right-clicking and opening a notepad, but the best way is actually to change the file extension to MHT, and this will allow us to open it up inside of Internet Explorer. So if I double-click on this, it'll open up in Internet Explorer. So we see that indeed our username got pulled in, and our token got pulled in, and you'll also notice that this is an absolute and not a relative URL. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this link, and then I'm going to paste it into Chrome. I'll move this off to the side. I'll paste the link into Chrome. It says, your account is now activated. Click here to download the launcher, which indeed I am now part of the registered users. All right, the last thing I want to do is set up a basic free email service that will allow us to test with our real email clients. I don't typically recommend doing this a whole lot because you don't want to get your email sending blacklisted, but I've never really had a problem with it, so it doesn't really matter. At least in my experience, your SMTP server may be different. But there's a wonderful free service available called Mandrill. Let me go ahead and sign out so I can show you guys what the screen looks like when you just view it. All right. So Mandrill is a cool little service that allows us to send a bunch of email to wherever we want for free. It is perfect for testing, and of course it has paid plans that are appropriate for production applications. So if you want to actually send real email, you can either use your Gmail account's SMTP server, or you can sign up for a service like Mandrill. I'll go ahead and hit login. And I'm going to move this off to the side for a second while I check my API credentials. Yeah, okay. So what you're going to want to do is go to your options and click SMTP and API credentials. This is an API key that I created just for this particular project. Hopefully it's activated by now. Earlier it wasn't. But I have another one down there that's hidden, but I don't want people using my API key to spam a bunch of email. But what we got to do is use these parameters to log in with our SMTP element in our web.config, and that will be all that's necessary in order to send real emails to a real email address. So go ahead and create a new API key. If you don't want to send actual real emails to a real address and you only want to see them show up in your Mandrill dashboard, which is fine for testing, you could set test key to true. But anyway, so go ahead and create your API key. I'm going to move this off to the side, and then I'm going to fill in some parameters on my web.config. I'm going to comment out my specified pickup directory, and then I'm going to uncomment my SMTP configuration. The from is going to be nelsonlekay@gmail.com. Enable SSL is going to be true. Host is going to be smtp.mandrillapp.com. Port is going to be 587, which is the standard secure SMTP protocol. Username is going to be nelsonlekay@gmail.com. And the password is going to be any valid API key. So this key, which will be deleted at the end of this video. And that's about it. So if I go back into my project and I hit log out, let's go ahead and register with an account. I'm going to use my real email address and see if that email does come in. So I'm going to hit register. Username nlac5, email nelsonlekay@gmail.com, password register. It says welcome, please verify your email. And indeed, my toast notifications didn't pop up for some reason. Let me go ahead and get this into a pop-up window. Indeed, I got an email. It says, please click here to verify your account, or copy and paste the following link. So I can click here to verify the account, which comes back over here and says your account is now activated. Click here to download the launcher. So indeed, we did have some real email sending action going on, which is really cool. It allows us to test. Great for testing and probably for small scale development. Of course, though, if you purchase a subscription to Mandrill or pay their monthly fees for sending out emails, that's a perfectly valid way to send email as well. Okay, so in this video, we created a registration system for our users of the website. We allow them to register an account by passing in their username, email address, and desired password. We then send them an email verifying their email address. Once they accept the verification token or click on it, we activate their account by adding them into the registered group. So I think that just about wraps up everything I wanted to do with user registration.